So if I were to show you this sequence of repeating numbers, just on a loop, how long would it take for you to lose interest? Maybe 10 seconds, 5 seconds? I see some people in the back yawning already, so that's a good sign. Or maybe instead of numbers, if these were different symbols or different shapes, like a square, no. What if instead of something visual, this were something we could hear? What if instead of 4 numbers, we had 4 different notes, and we repeated that sequence of 4 notes 398 times? Would any of you even listen to a song like that? Well, you see, this reminds me of the first time I heard the song Fancy by Iggy Azalea. Fancy reached the top of the Billboard Top 100 charts in 2014 and remained there for 7 consecutive weeks. In other words, her song was unanimously the most popular song in the world for that period of time. So here's just a quick excerpt of what that song sounds like.
First things first, I'm the realist.
Right, Iggy, we know you're the realist, but your song is made up of 4 notes that repeats 398 times over the course of 3 minutes and 19 seconds. So upon hearing this song, I had a new realization. For the first time, I was a little bit disturbed by the lack of complexity in modern pop music. Look, I understand many of you may not care. I mean, not everything that we do has to be a reflection of our intellect, especially when it comes to entertainment. I mean, we enjoy watching an episode or 2 of Keeping Up with the Kardashians. It's okay, Kim. Keeping Up with the Kardashians, or reading trashy TMZ articles, or listening to songs like Fancy, or Trap Queen, or Hotline Bling. You get the idea, right? But whether we want to admit it or not, pop music is a reflection of our culture in many ways, right? It undisputably has the greatest societal reach in terms of sales. I would even go as far as to say one of the ways historians will remember us as a generation is based on the music we listen to the most. Imagine explaining to your grandkids that the song that captivated the youth in 2014 was made up of 4 notes, or featured lyrical gems such as,
Who that, they do that.
Right. Thank you, Iggy, for those words. So I really want to invite you to ask this question with me. Where has the complexity in pop music gone? In order to really understand complexity, we must define it. So simply put, complexity is the amount of information an object has, or for our purposes, a song. And what does the research tell us about the trends that pop music seems to be following? Well, researchers looked at a pool of 500,000 pop songs made since the 1960s. What they found was that if you break it down into 3 categories, timbral variety, pitch complexity, and average loudness, in many ways, songs are getting worse. What that means is by following the trend in timbral variety is decreasing. Songs are starting to sound the same when it comes to the tonal quality of the music itself. Pitch complexity is also going down. So newer songs will be less adventurous than its previous predecessors, especially when it comes to melody and chord progressions. And finally, the average loudness of a song on the radio is going up, right? So that only speaks about the trend for the last 50 years. I wanted to know, what can we learn by looking 200 years ago, by looking at Western classical music and juxtaposing it with modern contemporary pop music. So in order to advance this discussion, we can break down complexity into different categories. When we say something is musically complex, what that really means is we're understanding it in terms of melody, harmony, rhythm, and structure. So in this example, this is just an excerpt from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the second movement. Pay attention to all the notes that are being played. Follow along with the visualization of the screen that indicates all the notes in the score that Beethoven wrote in. Take a listen. Right? And take that and compare it with the masterpiece of the decade, Fancy. Right, so you don't have to be a music expert to see the enormous disparity in terms of musical complexity when we look at what was written 200 years ago with 2 years ago. Now, I want you to consider something else, right? As human beings, everything our generation will discover, that's only based on what has already been established by the past generations. Advancements in understanding, new technological feats, and scientific discoveries, that's courtesy of what our ancestors have already provided us in terms of knowledge. So why does it seem that when it comes to musical complexity, this has gone in the complete opposite direction, right? It doesn't make any sense. Imagine if I told you that 200 years ago in Europe, the medical sciences, for instance, were far more superior than they are now. That sounds absurd. So why does it seem like this is actually true when it comes to music, right? Ladies and gentlemen, there is a missing piece that we haven't even begun to consider yet. There is something that can help us understand the state of modern pop music and its complexity, right? So let's go back to our definition. Complexity, the amount of information an object or a song has. But what really makes up information? It's essentially just what we're paying attention to, which has always been melody, harmony, rhythm, and structure, right? We could gauge these individual categories empirically or qualitatively. For us, if something had a lot of melodic information, that would make up one of the reasons why it's complex. But the way music is made now deals with something else entirely as well, right? Nowadays, music producers, audio engineers, sound designers, and just musicians overall, they also deal with what the sound actually looks like in terms of a waveform. They can design their sound, and that is the missing piece, sound design, right? We now can use audio technology to quite literally put any piece of information anywhere in the audio frequency spectrum, from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, for instance. If that meant nothing to you, if you're not an audio geek like myself, don't worry. Take a look at this next slide, right? Whether you've been studying music for 30 years and graduated from Juilliard, or your musical expertise goes no further than listening to iHeartRadio, it doesn't matter. All of us can agree with the fact that music really makes us feel things, right? So how would a composer in 1847 go about eliciting a particular emotional response? Listen to what Edvard Grieg does from this excerpt of In the Hall of the Mountain King. Pay attention to what the music makes you feel, but also focus on what components of the music are actually making you feel that way. Right? So we can all, on some basic level agree that music was rather creepy. It was a little bit unsettling. Personally, I felt like there was something lurking in the shadows that I knew was there, but I couldn't really see what it was. But if we ask ourselves, what makes us feel like that? How was Edvard Grieg actually able to accomplish this effect? Well, we have to look at what he intentionally had control over. He could write different melodies for different instruments. He's responsible for the harmonic content in the overall score. He could control the rhythm based on what he's writing in the score, right? So he has control over all these different components of complexity. But he doesn't have the same control over the nature of the sound itself. Don't get me wrong, he can write specific parts in for specific instruments based on what they sound like. He can use dynamics and articulations, which the performers are supposed to follow. But he doesn't have the same control over the waveform that we hear from the speakers like, well, we have today. So if we were to strip all that away, if we were to take away melody, harmony, rhythm, just complexity in terms of those things, could we still have a very compelling piece of music that could elicit a certain response without any of that? Well, you be the judge. Listen to this excerpt from the soundtrack of The Social Network. Pay attention to what it makes you feel, but also realize how strikingly bare it is in terms of melody and harmony. Right, so that piece of music itself, what was the melody of that? It was essentially just one note fluctuating in and out of pitch, right? What was the harmonic variation in that? I don't know. The rhythm consisted of maybe a bass note being repeated every 4 bars. But still, that music had it made me feel tense. It's as if there's this imminent conflict approaching. So it's amazing that just based on the way we design sound itself, we can compensate for the lack of complexity in all these other fields, right? So in order to demonstrate how musicians in the modern day would take advantage of technology that can design their sound, allow me to do a very quick demo to show you, right? So think about this as, well, the application GarageBand on steroids. It's called Logic Pro. And we just have a couple of elements here. Let's see how we could go about making the next hit of 2016. So we have some notes here, right? They're just honestly just repeated notes. We have a virtual drum machine that is providing a clapping sound for us. This is what the drum machine looks like, right? And I literally Googled annoying sound.mp3 and I found this. Wow, fascinating. So what we can actually do is we can take the annoying sound and we can move it into something called a sampler, which I've already done in this track. What a sampler allows us to do is it takes recorded sound and you can play it at any pitch or at any speed. So we can move this up, right? And I can start maybe putting in some notes. Beautiful. And we can maybe just fill in the gaps here. Right, what I'm doing isn't very intricate. We can go back to our clapping samples. We can add some reverb. There we go. And finally, we can look at our synthesizer, right? So a synthesizer allows us to create sounds from scratch. So what you're hearing when you listen to the synthesizer is just the audio representation of a sine wave. Think of a sine wave on a graph. That's what you're hearing. And let's see, we can pitch this down 3 octaves. We can turn this up a little bit. Let's see, am I missing anything? We can add maybe some reverb for our sampler. Maybe loop this out a little bit. Spend like 1.5 to 2 minutes. And let's see, anything else we need to do with the notes? Yeah, in no time we can honestly create the next hit of 2016. All right, there we go. Thank you. Right. So what I was able to do in 2 minutes was actually a recreation of Katy Perry's hit single Dark Horse, which sounds like this. Right, so it wasn't far off to what the final product actually sounded like. And look, I realize that many of you may not be musicians or producers or sound designers or audio engineers, but each and every one of you has an individual passion that is unique to who you are as a person, right? So I want to ask you, what makes your passion complex? The funny thing is, we really think we know the answer. I mean, it's what we love to do. We know what we love to do makes it interesting or worth doing in the first place or intricate or complicated. But by making ourselves willing to go back and revisit this question, by accommodating new pieces of information that we've never considered before, the same way that I started looking at sound design as a component of musical complexity, we can quite literally change solidified conclusions about our passions itself, right? If you want to change what you can do with your passion, start by reevaluating what makes it complex. Thank you.